Hi, I'm Jason Blake, and welcome to PEI Newswatch. Today I have Alex Chalsovsky from the Bundy Group. Alex, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't you tell the PEI membership a little bit about yourself, how you got into this analytics, and tell a little bit about the wage analysis and what you discovered so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whirlwind version is I spent a lot of my career doing high-end market research on various industrial markets, on the economy, on labor market dynamics. Some of you may remember me from my time at ITR Economics. I know PEI members are big fans of ITR. For the last 2 years, I've been with a small recruiting agency outside of Chicago, which is really specializing in engineering, white-collar positions, and a lot of times kind of the field service techs as well that are obviously one of the big demand roles within the PEI industry. And in this entire time, my focus has been on leveraging data and analysis to drive better decision-making for better business outcomes. And so in the last 2 years, obviously, the labor market has been a major challenge for employers. The shortage of labor, the increasing costs of labor. And so I felt like it was important to bring some reliable, accurate, and timely market information around compensation to PEI members, which is why, Jason, you and I worked together to develop the compensation dashboard that is now, I'm happy to report, live and available to members to download and leverage as you plan for your 2024 budgets, as you try to determine what the competitive market rates are to pay new people that you're hiring, as well as to make sure that the folks that you already have are getting paid competitively so that they don't leave in 2024. So that's the idea behind the dashboard, and we're really excited to share it with PEI members.
Well, Alex, I'll tell you, one of the most important things and one of the issues that our members have is this workforce talent shortage. And the first time we talked about this, I got pretty excited about it because this data is really kind of live. When you pull this data, it comes fresh. It gives you a very good evaluation of that market. Can you tell a little bit about where that data comes from and what it's previously used for?
Yeah, absolutely. So the database that feeds the dashboard is from a company called Labor IQ. It's a compensation provider to primarily the recruitment and financial industry based out of Dallas, Texas. They have a database with tens of millions of different data points. And the coolest part about this platform was that how they validate their information. They've partnered with a top-tier payroll provider, and every single month they're comparing the results of their database output to about 9 million W-2s, actual people's wages, to make sure that the database moves in sync with the market, that it stays current, up to date, and actionable no matter when you're using that information. So it was a big differentiator for me when I was looking for a source of compensation data, because I sat through probably a dozen sales calls with all of the comp tool providers, and this is the only one that had the validation process and the only one that I found that was specific to the industry in which we're searching. So for example, the data that I'm presenting in the dashboard is particular to people that provide support services to the oil and gas sector, as well as basically contractors that are involved in installation of new equipment, both in terms of new builds and kind of retrofit applications, which really is a perfect fit for PEI member companies.
So, Alex, you bring up an interesting point. You talked a lot about the dashboards and how there's certain specific metrics that they can look at. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think it's a really key element of the analysis that's going to be done by the member using this information. One of the things that we really focused on was refining the data so it reflects the typical PEI member company. So the database is really focused on providing recommendations for companies that are on the smaller side. We're talking about below 5 million in revenue, 1 to 19 employees. So it's important to recognize that the recommendations in the dashboard are really geared towards those smaller member companies. If you are one of the medium size or the larger companies, you've got to understand that the implications are your recommendation is likely going to be slightly higher than what's presented in the dashboard. It's also important to recognize that from a regional perspective, we've highlighted about half a dozen different municipal markets, so large metro areas around the country, to give a good broad-based flavor of where compensation is around the country. But if you're in a small town in Arkansas, you're not likely going to want to compare yourself to Dallas or Chicago, right? And so it's important to zero in. And the great part about this dashboard is PEI has negotiated on your behalf preferential discounted pricing if you want to get data that's specific to your exact location, your company size, the positions with the experience and education level that you're looking for exactly. So the dashboard is meant to give you a kind of a broad, comprehensive overview, a snapshot, if you will, of what compensation looks like across the country for some of the top positions in demand right now. For the first edition of the dashboard, we've decided to focus on job superintendent and service technician. So those are key positions, obviously, PEI members are trying to fill. But there are other, obviously, roles that companies are hiring for all the time. Right now, there's a huge demand for accountants, for example, and management has an unemployment rate of something like 1.6%. So if you need something that's beyond the snapshot that the dashboard provides, you have the ability to get at that information as well.
Well, Alex, I know you just kind of talked a little bit about the certain entry level service technicians versus more seasoned technicians, and I think that's an important data point that they should take a look at, because there's definitely a difference. And I think that entry level for those who are bringing in the next generation of service techs is important. Let's dive a little deeper at this point, and let's talk a little bit about, hey, if I'm a member and I'm looking at your dashboard and I see that I'm real close to one of the areas that PEI evaluated, and I'm much lower than I should be, what would the steps would you recommend for those folks to kind of up their base salary?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of different recommendations on this front. And the first one has to do with the realization that you're not just competing for those service techs with other PEI member companies or other firms in your industry, right? That's a position that's in high demand across a number of different verticals. And so you have to be competitive, not just internally, but you have to be competitive across a swath of industries. So do your research, understand how the demand side pull looks like from other markets also competing for a similar skill set individual that you're trying to hire. And then I think that it's really key to understand not only what you need to be paying new people coming in, but also how to make sure that your existing people are getting paid competitively and fairly. And that really involves a benchmarking process to compare what you're currently paying folks to what the competitive market rates are today. And then when necessary, making adjustments. Now, I'm not, calling for a 20 or 30% all of a sudden kind of light switch flip, and then they're making that much more money. But what you do need to know is how much difference there exists between what the competitive rate is today and what you're actually paying them. And then engage the individual in a conversation. Basically say, look, we've done our research. We realize you're making below market wage right now, and we want to help get you there over time. We can't do it overnight, but what are some of the other things that we can give you in the near term that will kind of bridge the gap a little bit, right? So, and that can be a spot bonus. It can be some flexibility of working schedule. It can be, for example, some unofficial PTO days that, as long as they work it out with their direct line manager and have someone to back them up to make sure that their responsibilities aren't falling through the cracks, that's a real gift or value that you can give to your employees that allow you to kind of band-aid and bridge that gap a little bit while you work to get them up to competitive market rates. So those are some of the things that I recommend doing. And the key element in this entire thing is treat the employees more like partners than the traditional power dynamic of I'm the employer, you're the employee, and it's this power down. I tell you what happens. Let's have a conversation, right? We tell you what we need from you to be successful as a business. You get the right to tell us what you need from us to be successful. Otherwise, what tends to happen is people are quiet about what they need until they're ready to leave the organization, right? And it's much more difficult to get someone to stay once they've already made up their mind and are putting in their 2 weeks notice, rather than if you have that proactive discussion with them in advance.
I think that's good advice, Alex. I think one of the things we hear back from our members is, first of all, it takes a lot to invest in, these service techs. They put a lot of dollars into them before they're productive. And so retaining them and finding other ways to retain them is very, very important for the long run success for their companies. I know you've been doing this for a while now, and you've evaluated a lot of different industries. And you took a look at ours and took a first snapshot of our industry in those certain locations. How do you think that compares to the national average for like-kind jobs? Because sometimes we hear that our service techs are underpaid compared to the overall national average when you compare it to maybe a machine shop person or a diesel technician. What are your thoughts on there? What did you see?
Yeah, so the first comment I'll make in response to your question is pretty much every industry tends to think that they're underpaying
Yeah,
people relative to
right.
what everybody else is paying. The reality is that pay has become fairly transparent in recent years, and people, speak with their footprints. They go to where the pay is most competitive. I do think that the industry does tend to pay about on average, or I would call it on median relative to the market. What I also think is important to note, though, is that it's not fair to just compare the hourly rate, right? You've got to compare all of the other tangible and intangible benefits that are provided, right? Whether it's a car allowance, a gas card, benefits of all types, flexibility of schedule, and things like that. And so I think it's important to look at the whole picture when you're trying to compare and contrast yourself. But at the end of the day, that's exactly what the dashboard is designed to help you do, is to not have this big guess or question mark, but you can see in the dashboard, here's the national average, here's what the recommended rate is based on the supply and demand of talent with these specifications that we're clarifying. And by the way, we do present service techs in the dashboard at the entry level, mid-career, and senior position, and also an entry level and senior job superintendent. So it gives you that nice range. But it gives you all of the ideas. In particular, there's a great element that with each job recommendation, each salary recommendation, you get to see the bell curve. And so in some cases, the recommended range that the platform suggests is somewhere around the 50th percentile mark, depending on the demands of that particular marketplace. In other cases, you might need to pay in the 75th percentile to be successful at getting people in. And in some markets where the demand is lower, you might be okay paying in the 25th percentile. So the devil with the data is always in the details, Jason, and you really have to kind of zero in on the specific nuances of your individual positions to figure out whether or not your pay is competitive.
Well, I like what you have to say there, Alex. I like the philosophy of people vote with their feet. It's interesting in our industry, to give you some thoughts and feedback from our members, is that we have a pretty strong retention in our industry. In fact, the average years in our industry is about 25 years. 50% of our members that were surveyed in our last surveys had over 25 years of service. So once they get in our industry, they're here to stay. So that's good to hear. That a lot of people vote by their feet. Secondly, I know you mentioned if a member does want to get more in-depth in their evaluation, please reach out to one of your membership managers, reach out to PEI, reach out to your membership managers, and they will work with Alex and Bundy Group to set that up and put together the profile that you need to do a market evaluation of your area. Is there anything else, Alex, you'd like to share with our members before we sign off here?
Yeah, I would say for 2024 in particular, we're going to have a fairly unique set of circumstances, right? We're going to have an economy that's facing increasing headwinds. So we have clear kind of slowdown in demand. We saw that already with October's gasoline demand being down quite a bit relative to the previous months. And we're starting to see those headwinds increase. Some signs are forming in the armor of the consumer because credit card delinquency rates are going up. So their spending is likely to take a step backwards in Q4 and onwards into 2024. Businesses, because of high interest rate environment, are going to cut back on investment, particularly on those big CapEx projects. But it's going to be a time where the economy goes through these pockets of recession. And at the same time, the labor market is not expected to see massive layoffs. And so it's going to be a very unique set of circumstances where you have to figure out how to retain the people that you have in the face of lower demand. And that's going to create challenges for your profitability. It's going to create challenges for your retention. And so this really has to be not an afterthought, but a proactive strategic initiative on your part as to how to figure out how do we navigate these unprecedented times and figure out how to keep our people at a time where demand for our goods and services might not be as strong. So it really requires a entirety of the executive team to be thinking about this, to be putting forward resources, time, energy, effort in terms of figuring all this out and then navigating those currents over the course of 2024, which is, from an economic perspective, going to be a more difficult year than what we've seen so far in 23.
Well, thank you, Alex. That's good advice to our membership. For those members that are watching today, you can get this data if you sign on to our web portal and go through our website. You can go on your single sign-on to get this information, the dashboards that Alex and I are referring to. Once again, I'd like to thank Alex and the Bundy Group for spending some time with us today and discussing the wage analysis for our service technicians. I'm Jason Blake, and thank you for watching PEI News Watch.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.